Okay, well, I would say let's start. So I would say again, thank you for being with us on this lovely and where I'm standing, sunny 12th of May 2022. The topic of today will be around how to generate real-world evidence efficiently by combining digital biomarkers and self-reported outcomes. And to introduce myself, I'm Thierry Hillerer, Product Marketing Lead at EvidentIQ, and I'll be the master of ceremonies today. The live session will be hosted by three of our finest industry specialists, Austria-based Andreas Weber, who is our CEO at EvidentIQ. Andreas brings more than 20 years of industry experience and has held top management functions at ERT, Bioclinica, and Oracle Health Sciences. Secondly, we do have Paris-based Lise Radowski. Lise is EvidentIQ's Global Senior Vice President for Decentralized Clinical Trials. She coordinates EvidentIQ's products, services, and partnerships to offer clients with efficient, cost-effective DCT. She also oversees the data science team, which produce real-world studies. And our third speaker is San Francisco-based George Eleftheriou. He is the co-founder and CEO of Feel Therapeutics, a San Francisco-based startup developing biomarkers and therapeutics to change the way we diagnose, manage, and care for mental health. In today's presentation, we will cover the following topics. What is real-world evidence and the different sources of real-world data that will be presented by Andreas, and how to collect real-time physiological data 24/7 with Feel Therapeutics, and how to collect self-reported outcomes and some example of the Carinity community. To conclude, we will have Andreas doing the wrap-up on our joint partnership and how to combine the two innovative data sources. And after that, we will open the line for a live Q&A session. Some additional session logistics. You can play this webcast in full screen by pushing the icon on the right bottom corner of the screen. This session is being recorded. Please also feel free to use the chat box that is private to send us any questions you might have, and that we will gladly respond to at the end of the session. So without further ado, Andreas, George, and Lise, the stage is yours.
Many thanks, Thierry. I have the pleasure to cover the first topic in our agenda today, and that is about shedding a little bit more light on what real-world evidence and real-world data really is and what role it actually plays in healthcare decisions, and also very specifically in the future in clinical trials. Next slide, please. So you might think, first of all, what is real-world data? We have actually been able to come up with a definition that was provided by the FDA. And according to the FDA, real-world data is actually data which is relating to patient health, to the patient health status, and or the delivery of healthcare routinely collected from a variety of sources. And at the end of the day, when we're looking at real-world data, then we can find there are three buckets. First of all, there is data that is produced by physicians. Secondly, or in the second bucket, we have data that is generated during routine patient care. And thirdly, we also look at data that is produced by patients. And if I'm going back to the first bucket, data produced by physicians, where is this data coming from? It's basically coming from patient registries and cohorts. It's coming from medication cohorts, and it can be also found in medical reports. And when we're looking at the second bucket, which is data generated during routine patient care, then we're looking, predominantly at electronic health records, but also we're looking at different databases like medical databases, administrative databases, claims databases from insurances, and the alike. And when we're looking at the third bucket, data produced by patients, then we will see that is actually data which is generated by online studies with self-reported data from patients. Meaning, for this bucket, we are actually addressing the patients themselves in a prospective way. It's also about the Internet of Things, connected devices via the internet. It's about social networks. It's about patient communities and patient forums in the internet. And it's also about mobile apps. So having that in mind, we have actually three different and distinct sources for real-world data. Now, where is actually real-world data also used? That is the other question we probably want to look at. Next slide, please. Real world, as you can probably imagine, real world data and also real world evidence, which is basically the evidence generated by real world data, they're playing both an increasingly important role in healthcare decisions. There is an increasing recognition in the market that, and in the pharmaceutical industry, that real life outcomes may actually differ from clinical trial results. Why is that? Clinical trials are actually creating an artificial environment. Clinical trials are extremely regulated, as we all know, and real world outcomes might actually look a little bit different than the data or the evidence that is created within a clinical trial scenario or environment. Also, we will find actually nowadays that innovative medicines are entering the market earlier and earlier. So they're entering at a very, very early stage. And that actually creates a need to better understand how the medicine is really working. What about the safety and the efficacy? And that is basically another usage of real world data. It's also a little bit about the willingness to focus on patient needs and to better involve patients in their care pathway. As you probably also know, patient centricity has been now for a number of years quite a big buzzword in the life sciences industry. But it's important. It's important. Patient centricity means actually that we should look at that we should put the patients in the middle of everything that we're doing around healthcare and also about clinical research and development. So the patient should be really the focus point. When the patient is a focus point, we actually need to ask the patient what they think. What do they think about care? What do they think about clinical trials? It's also important to be informed on product differentiation and to better understand and evaluate treatments when there's an increasing number of options available. That is basically another usage of real-world data. And there are also new ways to collect it and analyze data in a real-life setting, and that is actually the opportunity that real-world data is providing to pharmaceutical sponsors and to commercial organizations at the sponsor side, as well as observational studies. So that, I think, summarizes pretty much the usage of real-world data. It's basically about information on the patient journey that is which answers questions about the unmet needs and the quality of care, quality of life in general from a patient perspective. So when we are collecting real-world data and we are creating real-world evidence, we are putting the patient in the front seat. We are really creating patient centricity. And there's just one other point I want to let you know, and that is basically where or at which stage in clinical development in general real-world data is collected. In the past, real-world data was collected mainly for commercial purposes, for market access purposes, or for observational purposes when a medicine entered the market at a really early stage. But if you look at the last 2 years, there have been actually a number of new guidances from the FDA, which are really encouraging sponsors of clinical trials to collect real world data and create real world evidence also as part of their clinical trials. And quite a number of medicines have been actually approved, meanwhile, exactly on that basis. So we are seeing a clear dynamic, a clear new trend that the usage of real world data and the creation of real world evidence, also in a clinical environment, in clinical studies, will actually increase year on year. Many thanks. And with that, I'm handing over to Lise.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Andreas, for this great introduction around real-world data and real-world evidence and the importance that they increasingly play in clinical development, but also for many other purposes. So what I wanted to talk to you more about today is how can we make this real-world data collection as continuous as possible, and how can we utilize primarily physiological data coming from wearable devices in order to do so. So let me start by sharing a little bit about the problem that made us start our company a few years ago. It was all about the lack of objective measurement in the field of mental health and neuroscience. Probably many of you know that when it comes to our mental health, we still rely on self-reported questionnaires in order to make diagnosis or treatment decisions, and we leave our patients all by themselves and alone when they are outside of their psychotherapist office or their psychiatrist office. However, that is not the case in many other medical fields where we are using objective measurement tools for decades now. For example, imagine how the management of diabetes would be if we didn't have glucose monitors, or how the management of heart disease would be if we didn't have blood pressure monitors. With that in mind, we started our company a few years ago, and we believe that we have a very unique opportunity today to bring those objective measures in the field of mental health and neuroscience, which are important, of course, for those therapeutic areas, but also very important for a series of other therapeutic areas where mental health, emotional health is really important and in many cases an important comorbidity of primary disorders. This unique opportunity is because we have now access to data that we never had access to before. Data that are coming from wearable devices, from digital health applications and digital therapeutic applications, from clinician dashboards, especially after COVID-19 that brought telemedicine in the forefront of providing care and support to users. And based on those digital and physiological data sources, we can extract a series of insights that can help us better manage the care of the patient, which is, as Andreas mentioned, the most important part, but also to generate real-world evidence, to develop novel biomarkers, and of course, support the reimbursement and regulatory milestones of pharmaceutical companies. So with that in mind, we have built a digital biomarkers and endpoints platform that collects data from multiple different data sources. As I mentioned, wearable devices, where we're using a proprietary wearable device, but also integrating third-party devices in our platform, from voice and text, from the sensors on the mobile phone of the user. And through those data sources and with the use of our proprietary algorithms, we translate them into actionable insights related to mental health, but also those endpoints have applications in so many other disease areas. So our primary digital endpoints relate to mood. We have a technology that is able to detect changes in the mood state of an individual. We also have a validated biomarker for stress, a series of metrics related to sleep, psychomotor activity, and body rebalance. Then we take those data points, those digital endpoints, and apply them in a series of therapeutic areas. Those could be in depression, anxiety, and stress, but also in other conditions, as I mentioned, from breast cancer to multiple sclerosis. This is possible because of this novel technology that allows us to monitor changes in the physiology of an individual 24/7. As I mentioned, we're using a proprietary device that measures changes in the response of the autonomic nervous system through a series of biosensors. an electrodermal activity sensor, a heart rate monitor, a skin temperature sensor, an ambient temperature and humidity sensor, and a very accurate activity monitor as well. And through those different physiological sources of data, we're able to calculate a series of endpoints that help us, on the one hand, collect greater information from the user 24/7, and on the other hand, to prompt them to go to a companion application and provide us with additional unofficial or official EPROs that then can be used for a series of different applications. And with that, I would like to give the stage to Liz to tell us more about patient-reported outcomes.
Thank you, George, for this great presentation of the Feel platform. Now I will explain you how to efficiently collect self-reported outcomes. So I will start with the definition of a self-report. So a self-report is any test or measure or survey that relies on an individual's own report. And the report might be related to symptoms, behaviors, beliefs, etc. We define three main types of self-reported data. First, the patient-reported outcomes measures, PROMs, which aim to collect information on how illness or care impact patient well-being. These PROMs can be related to quality of life measure. It might be a general measure of the impact of a disease or a symptom on quality of life, but the PRO can also focus on a specific domain of the quality of life. The PROMs can also address outcomes related to individual care. For example, we have a lot of PROs related to the measure of patient adherence or patient self-care. And the last bucket is related to the social aspect, the community. So does the patient feel alone? What is the impact of a specific disease on his or her social life? The second category of patient-reported data is patient-reported experience measure. So in this type of patient-reported data, the objective is to understand patient perception of their experience with the healthcare system. So PREMs can assess the care provided. So, for example, the patient experience with the medical visit, with the hospital service is visiting. It might be related to the provider culture. Does the patient feel trust? Is there a respect of the privacy of the patient, etc.? And the last category is all the PREMs that are related to the innovative services the care center can offer to offer the patient with a seamless patient journey. In general, PROMs and PREMs are measured via validated scales, validated questionnaire, and each questionnaire aims to assess and measure a specific outcome or specific experience. The last category of patient-reported data is ad hoc question. So in a questionnaire, we can have some PROs, some PREMs, but we can also include some ad hoc question to qualify a patient profile in terms of sociodemographic data, but also in terms of medical history. And we can also include question related to very specific points that could answer the research question you have. Here, it's a typical workflow of a prospective studies where you want to collect patient-reported data. So first, the first point is really to define the research objective, and depending of these research objectives, you will write the questionnaire, including the PROs that suit best your research question. As in interventional studies, you have a lot of materials, protocols, statistical analysis plan, data management plan you need to prepare. And an important thing is that for some PROs and PRE, you need to manage licenses and pay some fees related to this license. For some projects, it might be interesting to onboard an advisory board of key opinion leaders, physicians, and also patients to optimize the study design and also proofread the questionnaire. Depending on your research objectives, you might need to go through an ethic approval, and it also depends on the geographic area you will target in your study. Then you have the data collection phase. So you might collect the data thanks to a paper or via electronic surveys. During this data collection phase, you need to manage pharmacovigilance, material vigilance, if it applies. And then you have the data analysis part and the publication of the results. It's really interesting to see that we have more and more scientific communication on prospective observational studies, including PROs. For example, at Carnegie, we are used to publish in the Journal of Medical Internet Research, and we see that the impact factor is increasing from one year to another. The different key research topics you can address, you can obviously assess patient preference, and there are specific methodologies for that. For example, the discrete choice experiment is one of them. You can assess the burden of a disease, a treatment, a specific symptom, as I said, the impact on quality of life. And obviously, you can use prospective data collection to create new PROs, validate these PROs, or just measure PROs in different populations thanks to comparative studies. One thing that is very interesting for Carnegie is that we build a data for good model that aims to engage patients in online communities in order to advance medical research. So we have a patient community of 500,000 patients and caregivers. We cover more than 1,000 chronic disease. We cover very rare disease, orphan drug disease, and also high prevalence disease like asthma or diabetes. And these patients can register for free on the platform and access forums of discussion. They can access a health magazine providing information on the disease, and finally they can participate if they want on online research, and this research are sponsored by the life science industry. As I said before, it is possible to collect data, PROs and PREMs via a paper questionnaire, but it is important to say that thanks to the technology we have now, we can really improve the quality and the integrity of the data collected thanks to appropriate survey tools. So when you choose the survey tool you want to use, it's really important to check that you have the right types of question. For some PROs, you might need to manage images or videos. So it's really important to have a numerous type of question. You also need to be able to program some e-diaries if you want to run longitudinal studies or ensure several data points for same patient. It is also important to optimize the patient interface. So make sure that the questionnaire is easy to read for the patient. You have a user-friendly interface, and also that the questionnaire is available in different formats via mobile, tablet, or desktop, so you can avoid selection bias and make sure that the majority of patients can access the questionnaire. And finally, what is also important is to be able to connect this survey tool to your participants. So at Carnegie, as we have the patient platform, we have a qualified patient database, and we are able with our survey tool to target the right patient depending on his or her social demographic profile, his disease, his treatment, etc., and also monitor the participant recruitment. I will finish this part with 4 tips to successfully collect self-reported data. So the first one is really to make sure that the study materials are understandable for a patient perspective. So for that, you have different ways to optimize and reduce the literacy or numeracy bias. You can run a pilot studies on a small pool of patients, for example, 20 to 30 patients. So you really program the questionnaire and you test the questionnaire on a small pool of patients, and you analyze the data and you can rework on the questionnaire if needed. Another methodology might be to use cognitive debriefing, so one-to-one interviews, to go through the questionnaire with the patient and make sure that the questions are well understood and there is no missing items or ideas. And another method that is especially used in preference studies and in DCE methodology is to have several formats at the same time. You can use images, text, at the same time, voice messages, etc. The second advice is to ensure the representativeness of the sample. So you have several methods. The sample size calculation is obviously very important, but what is also important is to avoid selection bias. So you have the option to mix recruitment channels for that, and also to have some quotas at inclusion or post-survey adjustment in case you see that a subpopulation is not representative of the entire population. Then there are some, as for every studies and every methodology, there is some biases related to the prospective collection of self-reported data. So you can work on the duration, for example, of the questionnaire to limit the attrition bias. You can have in your survey tool some programming to make sure that the items are randomized, and then you can limit, for example, the ordering bias. And finally, what is also important is to have a robust data analysis. So you can implement sensitive analysis, internal validated DT test to make sure that your research is appropriate and logical, and then you can publish in high impact factor journals. So now I will let the floor to Andreas, who will explain how we can combine in a very innovative way the two data sources George and I just presented.
Many thanks, Lise. Yes, I think this is really where a lot of value can be created. We've been learning now from George about the collection of real-time physiological data. We've learned from Lise about self-reported data, and the real value lies actually in combining those data sources. Not only the two, but maybe even combining further data sources even. Next slide, please. Good. And this is actually what the partnership between Feel Therapeutics and EvidentIQ is about. First of all, we actually need to look at what basically happens if we are just looking at episodic data collection instead of data linkage and different sources. Obviously, just looking at episodic data collection, it creates a knowledge gap. Specifically in randomized controlled trials, the data that is collected may not address what is really required or what is related to the outcomes of the protocol. So there will be a gap. There might be also a systematic bias. Incomplete or poor data linkage can actually lead to bias, which is systematic in the reported outcomes. It's also a little bit about the limitation of scope, because disconnected data sources or missing data points even limits the scope of the research. So it has a direct input again on the outcome of the research. And obviously, it would also mean quite a huge opportunity loss. Without data linkage, studies can actually miss opportunities to expand data sources and to improve outcomes. So it's basically all about the quality of the outcome, and it's about the completeness, and it's also about the reliability. Now, the combination of Feel Therapeutics and EvidentIQ actually combines self-reported patient data with continuous and real-time digital monitoring. And that is basically an approach which takes real-world evidence or real-world data, as we have been defining it, to the next level. It's all about data linkage. It's basically all about bringing data from different sources together in order to address the topic of the research in a more cohesive way, in a more complete way, and in a most efficient way. Next slide, please. Now, when you look at a research project or a clinical trial, how does it actually look like practically working with Feel and with EvidentIQ together? What you can see here is pretty much a workflow. It's a process flow. So what we are actually doing is we are actually starting off with first online questionnaires. And those questionnaires are used for study design services. It's about EPROS, it's about addressing points in the protocol, it's about endpoint optimization, it's about feasibility. It's basically also about the advisory board that Lise has actually mentioned in her presentation. It's also about patient recruitment. That is another area where we at EvidentIQ can actually support our customers. As we just have heard, one of our big assets is a patient community with more than 500,000 patients on it in Europe, but also in the United States. And we can tap into that community to recruit patients for any given trial. And it's also about screener and first questionnaires, including EPROS. So for each patient that meets the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the trial, we would actually go to the next step, and we would actually start with collecting data. And that would be the data collection mechanism George has been describing in his presentation. We would look at sensor logistics. We would look at patient onboarding in the Feel technology platform, and we would look at study execution. We would deliver the Feel emotion sensor to the patient. We would actually organize some orientation sessions. We would onboard the patients in the Feel app and in the program, and we would basically onboard patients on the study steps. The next activity would be then really the collection of data and the monitoring. So we are looking at data, we're looking at the biomarkers George has been describing, we're looking at the mental health context information via the Feel platform. We are using the Feel emotion sensors to collect biomarkers, as we have been discussing today. We are completing emotion journals. And we are also completing the context information through the Feel app. And all that is constantly and regularly monitored. And then the other step, what we're doing as well, is obviously for EvidentIQ, we are following up with further questionnaires. And this actually relates back to the self-reported outcome data collection that Lise has been describing. We are continuously monitoring actually the data that we are receiving from the patients, and we're using actually our ePro or our eCOA capabilities. And that all together, EvidentIQ and Feel, we are creating actually additional insights that without this approach, you would actually not find in your research program or in your clinical trial. Biomarker information is getting translated into insights. Insights are generated by combining the data sources from the biomarkers, from the sensors, and also the patient-reported outcome information. And last but not least, we are also providing then the scientific communication. Next slide, please. Good. Sorry, one before. That was too quick. Good. We also want to give you a few examples how this could look like in a real research environment. One example would be if you would like to measure the impact of physical activity on RA patients' well-being. And it would look like as follows. I mean, via sensors, we would actually measure data like the numbers of steps a patient is doing per day, per hour. We would also look at emotional biomarkers and collect data of this type. In combination, we would also send questionnaires to the patients, and we would actually identify or get more insight on the patient profile. We would get more insight on the quality of life. We would get more insight on physical and also psychological well-being of the patient via ePro. Another example could be actually to define the factors that are influencing cancer patients' level of fatigue. Again, with the Feel sensors, we would actually measure sleep, we would measure stress level, we would measure physical activities of the patients. And via the self-reported outcome, we would actually look again at the patient profile and the perception of the fatigue. Another use case might be to look at cognitive and physical impairment in Parkinson patients. Via the sensor, we would measure body balance. We would actually look at ANS responsiveness. We would look at stress level. Again, number of steps, perhaps. And again, via the self-reported outcome, we would look at patient profile, neuropsychological test, impact on quality of life, and data like that. And we would bring it together and measure it, analyze it, and create actually additional results for the research project. Next slide, please. So basically, you might wonder now if this is a good, or you might think that this is a good approach. So where could we actually use that approach of data linkage? As I mentioned already, we've got more than 500,000 patients and caregivers on in our patient community in the big countries in Europe, but also in the United States. And you can see we are strong in many, many different indications like diabetes, like mental health, like autoimmune, like virology, like CNC, like oncology. But Field Therapeutics obviously also have some areas where they're particularly strong in. And those areas are different diseases in mental health, also in oncology, and also in sleep disorders. And as you can actually see, there's a very, very good match because, again, via the field sensors, we can actually collect biomarker information in those therapy areas or indications. And at the same time, we have actually a sufficient community of patients in our patient community that we can tap on to generate self-reported data. Next one, please. So finally, what are the benefits then of our partnership, Feel Therapeutics and EvidentIQ? I just want to summarize a little bit. It's a very innovative and new data linkage approach that we are providing. And that approach is able to fill knowledge gaps and with the aim to get a more complete picture of health problems and also in order to solve real-world problems. It's a full digital methodology with direct patient access that is capturing real-world evidence data and is still monitoring patients during the study, and that all in a complete digital environment. If you think about clinical trials, that same approach can actually be used in decentralized trials to fully 100% decentralized clinical trials. We have actually a combination of best-in-class technologies like ECOA and also the sensors from Feel and the data science experience in EvidentIQ, which has been developed over many years. The sensors are obviously used to evaluate emotional parameters based on physiological framework collection. And last but not least, I want to mention that both Feel and also EvidentIQ are not huge organizations. We have a respectable size. We are seeing ourselves as growing, obviously quite significantly over the last years, but we still have actually the agility that is required to address our customers' needs in the best possible way, being it pharmaceutical companies, being it CROs, or being it academic partners. Many thanks. In the next section, we would just want to give you very quickly, I know that time is running and we want to leave some time for questions and answers, but we want to give you a few figures, a few ideas about who we are, who EvidentIQ is, and who Feel is. Just to go through it, EvidentIQ currently has a little bit more than 100 employees globally. We are more than 24 years already in the industry, and we do have 9 offices worldwide. Our customers, we have about 120 pharma biotech customers. We have about 114 medical device customers, 76 CROs, and also 22 non-commercial or academic institutions. And I think it's important to understand that at EvidentIQ, we're offering a one-stop shop approach. So we do have actually technology that can support a clinical trial pretty much from the start to the end. In addition to that, we've got actually the patient community, and we've got our in-house data science capabilities to run virtually any form of real-world evidence data collection activities. That means we have been actually supporting so far in our history more than 3,500 studies with more than 2.5 million subjects in 83 countries. We've been also conducting more than 500 real-world evidence data collection studies so far. We've been delivering more than 100 manuscripts, abstracts, and posters. And we have been actually supporting our customers with 90 successful approvals, being it with the FDA in the United States or the EMA in Europe. With that, I would like hand over to George to briefly also introduce Feel Therapeutics.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I think it's important to highlight again the agility of our companies and how the two offerings together can bring significant value to our pharma partners or potentially CROs that are interested to collect continuous data for their users. As I mentioned, our company is primarily focusing on the development of digital biomarkers and therapeutics for mental health. but our technology can be used across a series of different therapeutic areas, as we discussed before. So although we see a very significant improvement in outcomes when it comes to depression, anxiety, based on our solutions, we also are able to monitor changes in quality of life and life satisfaction that are important for a series of therapeutic areas. As you know, we're working with large pharma as well as very well-known research and healthcare institutions, primarily in the US and secondarily in Europe. We're a team of 30, but we bring experience from very large organizations across the globe. And we are very lucky to be supported by top-tier investors in Silicon Valley and Europe. That's all from us.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas, George, and Lise. That was very instructive and insightful. So we got some questions from the audience. So I don't know who will take it. So the first question is it possible to integrate other data sources in this data linkage approach?
Lise, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, absolutely. So it is possible to integrate other data sources. We have in our platform the ability to build some ad hoc API. So depending on the research topic, it's something we can include in addition to sensor data and self-reported data.
Okay.
And just to add to that, on our end as well, we have been integrating third-party wearable devices as well, in addition to the data collected from our own proprietary device in our platform.
Okay. So a second question that we do have is, what are the advantages of using data linkage over other study methods?
Do you want me to take a first stab at this? I think that Andreas described it really well before. Just to summarize, I think it's moving from episodic measurement to continuity in measurement, which allows us to see what's happening in the real life of the patient, what's happening on a day-to-day basis, not only what's happening today and then after 3 months that we're going to measure them again. So I think that this data linkage approach allows us to have this continuity in measurement, and as a result, to extract greater insights and develop real-world evidence that are required for regulatory approval or for reimbursement priorities of our partners.
Okay. Thank you, George. We still have 2 questions here, as I can see. So, so what challenges are you seeing with deploying wearables and patient-reported data in terms of compliance? Not sure who will take it.
Probably this is for me as well on the wearable side. So what I wanted to mention is that what we have seen across clinical and commercial deployments that we have been running over the past few years is a very high degree of engagement. Actually, because people experience this connection with the technology, because this is a technology for the very first time that is able to recognize how someone feels in real time. This allows us to have the proximity to the user in order to provide the right level of support or the right level of prompt at the right time. So what we have seen in our deployments is people spending over 60 minutes per week in our application, and this allows us to collect a tremendous amount of data because of that high engagement. So contrary to what we have seen with lifestyle wearables that are primarily focusing on fitness, what we have seen in our case is a very high degree of engagement.
Yeah. And I would add to that as well from a GDPR compliance perspective. Obviously, our approach, both from Feel and also EvidentIQ, and the combined approach, is obviously fully GDPR compliant. I think the question is probably coming a little bit from the past, because there have been very initially, yes, there have been some concerns from regulatory agencies such as the FDA and the EMA, but therefore I mentioned also that there's been a big shift over the last few years. And actually, there have been guidances by the FDA to actually exactly use that approach that we've been presenting today. As long as you can actually clearly state that you're fully GDPR compliant, and that is what we are.
Okay, thank you, Andreas. So we still have one final question. How does data linkage? How long does a data linkage study usually takes, and how much does it cost?
Lise, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So the duration of the study is really dependent on the study design, on the inclusion criteria. But usually for this type of project with these two data sources, we can say that it's between 12 and 18 months for the duration, an average duration. And in terms of cost, it will be around 800k euros. And again, it also depends a lot on the study design, on the disease you want to target. Is it a high prevalence disease or not? It's very variable from one study to another, and we really are able to optimize the study design to suit your needs.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lise. I think, well, that was the last question. So you're coming to the end. So I would say thank you all for attending. If you want any more insights or in-depth details on the EvidentIQ and Feel Therapeutics solutions, feel free to get in contact with us. I would say thank you again for attending, and all have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.